Welcome to Fridays with a Forester. Today is March 21st, 2025. Expanding agroforestry is our topic today. Your host for today's webinar is myself, Gary Wyatt, Extension Educator with our forestry team, also teaching agroforestry out of Mankato. Also Lauren Beckus from our regional support staff in Andover. Thank you, Lauren, for helping out. And we also have Anna, part of our forestry team, helping out with questions and monitoring the webinar. Our two presenters today for Expanding Agroforestry is Caleb Langworthy. He's an agroforestry technical trainer with Savannah Institute, and then also Tyler Carlson, our agroforestry specialist with the Nature Conservancy. So we're really happy to have these specialists involved in agroforestry part of this webinar. I work with these guys a lot, and they're very good at what they do in teaching agroforestry around the state of Minnesota and Wisconsin. So real quickly, just to give you a prep on the agroforestry, the five practices of agroforestry, the intentional combining of agriculture and working trees to create sustainable farming systems, silvopasture, alley cropping, windbreaks, forest farming, and repairing forest buffers. So those are the five that we're going to be talking about today. We would like you to put your questions in the Q&A. There will be a chat, and I think Lauren's going to submit some in the chat, there'll be a link to other links of agroforestry and silvopasture. So do download that during the presentations. But if you have questions, put your questions in Q&A, please. All these recordings will be recorded on our Z-link, z.umn.edu/Fridays. And Caleb, I'm going to stop sharing, and you can start.
All right. Well, I'm Caleb Langworthy. I'm a agroforestry technical trainer with the Savannah Institute. I work with conservation professionals across the state of Minnesota, providing training on the five agroforestry practices and practices that facilitate getting into agroforestry systems. As we, look across the landscape, we see very segmented land uses. Nature is often is set aside. Conservation projects are usually set aside for no agricultural purpose. We have conventional agriculture that does not include conservation practices. And in a large way, what the Savannah Institute is proposing to do is integrate conservation practices into our agronomic systems. Right now, what we're seeing across the Midwest is bare fields and annual cropping systems that can lead to soil erosion, nutrient loss, lack of biodiversity, and polluted water. And what we're hoping to do, or what we're working towards, is a change that includes diverse perennial agriculture that holds these soils and nutrients in place, increases our biodiversity, and boosts our water quality. We can increase our water quality through just the environmental benefits that trees can provide on our landscape. So the vegetation and tree canopies can slow runoff, encourage a deposition and infiltration of water. Nutrients from runoff are taken up by woody plants. The trees provide oxygen and carbon, and contaminants and nutrients are processed by plants and microbes. So what is agroforestry? Agroforestry can look a lot of different ways. It can really depend on your production system, your land cover, and what you're hoping to do. So it can look if you're in a forested setting, it can look a little bit more like forest farming, where we're manipulating the canopy cover to grow crops in the understory of a forest. In open cropland, it can look like alley cropping, where we integrate trees into annual cropping systems. And it can look like silvopasture, where there is some amount of tree cover and livestock present. So alley cropping is the cultivation of crops and in alleys between regularly spaced rows of trees. Right here is this is an example of an alley cropping demonstration farm that the Savannah Institute leases down in the Urbana area in Illinois. In this demonstration, they are uh, looking at different widths of tree plantings and different spacings to see what works best for commodity corn and bean growers in central Illinois. Riparian buffers are a permanent strip of vegetation alongside streams, lakes, or wetlands. This is a project at Lily Springs Farm. This is right on the St. Croix River in Osceola, Wisconsin. And the folks at Lily Springs Farm wanted to install a riparian buffer for the water quality on the St. Croix River that you see there, but they also wanted it to be harvestable. So we included a lot of small fruits and hazelnut into their design. Forest farming is just the cultivation of specialty crops under existing forest canopies. Right now, a very popular type of forest farming that we see all across the upper Midwest is maple syruping. So I hope that you are able to boil your sap and make some delicious pancake syrup. Silvopasture is the integrated, intentional integration of trees, pasture, and livestock, and that can look a couple of different ways. One is silvopasture by reduction. Uh, Here is a picture of the Cedar Creek Ecosystem Science Reserve. I go past this all the time as I visit family in the area, and they have the longest term prescribed fire trials in the country, and they are integrating bison periodically to study the impact of herbivory on prescribed fire, and have been doing so since 2018. I thought it was just a really cool example of silvopasture um, in ecosystem work. Another example of silvopasture would be the Hoke Orchard down in La Crescent, Minnesota, right across from La Crosse on the Minnesota side. They're a well-known cider and apple orchard down there, and they have been grazing hogs and sheep through the understory of their pasture or understory of their orchard in a food safe way and in a way that cleans up the fruit drop in their organic orchard, which helps with the pest cycles in the orchard. Windbreaks are a pretty common design in western Minnesota. Often we're not seeing it across large crop fields, but we're seeing it around homesteads and livestock yards to keep the livestock out of the wind in the winter months. So, just as a general, the benefits that we're seeing is multiple and can be changed depending on the design and the goals of the producer or the landowner on their land. But often it includes restoring biodiversity, sequestering carbon, capturing fertilizers, diversifying their income, and improving livestock comfort as well. So another benefit of agroforestry is this concept of land equivalent ratios. So if we have a base acre of a certain crop and a base acre of woodlot, they will be able to produce so much, but the integration of the two gives you a land equivalent ratio of 1.4 land equivalent ratios for every acre that you're on. So this is a really important uh, concept as land prices have gotten higher and folks, especially getting into agriculture, are looking to diversify their income sources. So, what are some of these crops that we're talking about? In Minnesota, we've been a leader in developing some of these perennial cropping systems. The hazelnut has been supported through a number of institutions in Minnesota. Early chestnut breeding has been happening down in southeastern Minnesota at Badger Set Farm for a number of years. The MDA has worked with the elderberry co-op for a number of years. So I just wanted to highlight these and talk through the Midwest Elderberry Cooperative, which has 150 members from Canada to Virginia. but was originally started as the Minnesota Elderberry Cooperative, and has been supported through a number of grants through LCCMR and MDA over the years. Um, Currently, they are working on developing a flow-through washer destemmer to pull the elderberry off of the cyme and get it washed and ready for a individually quick frozen package for large institutions. The the Midwest Elderberry Cooperative acts as a middleman in the middle of the supply chain, aggregating elderberry from small growers and is selling to larger food buyers. Midwest hazelnuts, hybrid hazelnuts. This is a big one. It has a lot of partners up here because there's a lot of folks working on it in Minnesota. First of all is the Upper Midwest Hazelnut Development Initiative, and that is a joint effort between the University of Wisconsin and the University of Minnesota to develop, to breed the next round of hybrid hazelnuts to go out onto the landscape. Greg Schweitzer from the University of Minnesota Extension Regional Sustainable Development Partnerships hosts a Northern Minnesota hazelnut grower cluster, and that's a great group to connect to if you're interested in growing hazelnuts. The Regenerative Ag Alliance um, also is integrating hazelnuts into their tree range farm poultry system. The Forever Green Initiative is working on commercializing a lot of perennial crops, including hazelnut, and they've done a great job with that. And some folks with both UMHDI and Forever Green have come together to form Midwest Hazelnuts, and that is a perpetual purpose trust that is meant to establish a permanent hazelnut industry in the upper Midwest. And then I would also like to mention the Greenland's Blue Waters and the work that they have been doing, including this report that they came out with in December, financing the Midwest hazelnut value chain. So a lot of folks in Minnesota are really working on this crop, and I think it shows a lot of promise in the future. So, what is Savannah Institute's role in that? Savannah Institute is a Go First farm with the Upper Midwest Hazelnut Development Initiative. And one of the things that we are looking at is how can we implement the practice of alley cropping so that a producer can generate cash flow from their planting while they're waiting for those perennial crops to mature. So as you see here, we have a hybrid hazelnut alley crop plant, and the farm team in Spring Green, Wisconsin, has been growing annual vegetables in between the rows of these hybrid hazelnuts while we're waiting for them to mature. So right here we have a crop of winter squash. They've also grown crops of carrots and that sort of thing for food shelves and markets later in the winter. So, where are we doing this work? We do this work across the upper Midwest. We have saddle or offices in Champaign, Urbana, and Madison, Wisconsin, and partner farms all across the upper Midwest. I'm noticing here that we need to add a few more stars to the state of Minnesota because we have a number of partner farms that we're working with. How do we get more of these stars on the map and more folks interested in working with agroforestry systems? So one way that we do that is through our on-farm agroforestry training program. It's essentially an apprenticeship program. Jen there lives in Spring Grove, Minnesota, and has a farm there. And she connects aspiring agroforesters and folks looking to learn about agroforestry systems and what that might entail. And she partners them with experienced folks working in agroforestry systems across the state. So another way that we do that is through our technical service program. Our technical service program runs cohorts of clients in which we go through the technical service process that is outlined from NRCS. So we will connect, have folks write a farm narrative and spend some time learning about agroforestry. We'll conduct a site assessment. We'll assess the economics with folks, develop a design and a work plan for them, and then connect them to further resources as well for their agroforestry system on their farm. This is a farmer that I worked with outside Farmington, Minnesota, alongside the Forever Green Initiative. So in the upper left-hand corner, you'll see a site visit with myself, the local NRCS district conservationist, Andrew from Forever Green, and the farmer Kurt Kimber. And Kurt Kimber was looking to become one of the Go First farms and Go First hazelnut farms in Minnesota, and needed a design for his planting. So that's what we see there in the bottom left or bottom right hand corner. And the middle is a drone shot of the day that they were planting that hazelnut orchard out. So, and how do we fund it? There's a few different ways that we can fund that in Minnesota. One is through the NRCS, and the NRCS has cost share available and technical assistance available through myself and other folks at Savannah Institute for all 5 agroforestry practices. The Minnesota Association of Soil and Water Conservation Districts also has information for their local county soil and water conservation districts, and they fund these projects as well. The Savannah Institute is also a Midwest lead on a large climate smart commodity grant with the Nature Conservancy, and that project is accepting applications through the middle of April. And if you have any questions about the Expanding Agroforestry project, feel free to email either myself or Tyler Carlson, who works on that project, afterward. What resources do we have out there? A lot of resources on agroforestry. I just wanted to point you in a couple of directions. One is the University of Missouri Center for Agroforestry. They have a lot of very detailed production information for cropping systems that fit Missouri's needs. Over to the left side of your screen and on the bottom are examples of publications that the Savannah Institute has put out, looking at bottlenecks in the chestnut and hazelnut industry and food safety and silvopasture. And down there at the bottom is just an info sheet header from the National Agroforestry Center, which is another great place to get some quality information on agroforestry systems. And then right there in the middle, agroforestry trainings for natural resource professionals is through a program that the Savannah Institute, Interlace Commons, the National Agroforestry Center, Virginia Tech, Cornell, and I believe Appalachian Sustainable Development all worked on. And that is through a program called learnagroforestry.com. And it is a wealth of information put together from experts around the country on basic agroforestry practices. I got to give a shout out to Savannah Institute's team of researchers. We have a top-notch quality team of tree crop breeders at Savannah Institute that are working on breeding improved varieties of chestnut and hazelnut and persimmon and elderberry and currants for these sorts of systems, as well as a number of other crops. We have an ecosystem science department that is working on water quality testing and things like bioacoustic monitoring of grassland birds. So really interesting work that we're doing here at the Savannah Institute. I should point out that Gary Wyatt puts on a wonderful class every fall called the Minnesota Agroforestry Institute, and that is for SWCD and NRCS and DNR staff that are interested in agroforestry. It's a day and a half, and this year it'll be up in Baxter, Minnesota. And it's just a really quality program, and I would invite folks that are interested in agroforestry to take some time for professional development there. We see here in our pictures, we actually stopped to look at this American chestnut tree down in Wabasha, Goodhue County last year, which was kind of a treat. And then we all got excited and took a group photo there. Um, we know at the Savannah Institute that we cannot do it all. And that is why we have partnered with other organizations to create the Agroforestry Coalition. And that's just a network of innovators, agitators, and advocates that are working on agroforestry, advancing agroforestry across the United States. There's a lot of ways to plug into that. So if that's something of interest to you, feel free to scan that QR code and I can send you straight there. Or you feel free to send me an email and I'll connect you to Kit, who coordinates that Agroforestry Institute. And that's all I had. Thank you very much.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I'm Tyler Carlson, and I'm an agroforestry outreach and education specialist with the Nature Conservancy. I also have been practicing agroforestry, in particular silvopasture, for the last 15 years at my small ranch in Todd County in central Minnesota, and started dabbling in experimenting on the farm at home there with kind of some oak woodland restoration using regenerative grazing and other practices with my primarily my cattle herd in the woods, which has a deep history of being kind of a no-no in the forestry community, for many good reasons. Pushing back and trying to restrict, just sort of unfettered grazing access by livestock in wooded systems due to the destruction that can result from those practices when they're not implemented correctly. And then let's see here. Great. In 2020, the Sustainable Farming Association and some partners reached out to me to bring me on to sort of consult and assist with a grant that they got from the Legislative Citizen Commission on Minnesota Resources. This has since become a multi-phase effort. Phase 2 is continuing through June of next year. We're currently seeking funding for a third phase. The partners are Great River Greening, Sustainable Farming Association of Minnesota, the University of Minnesota Extension, and the University of Minnesota CINRAM, the Center for Integrated Natural Resources and Agricultural Management. And we have, in phase 1, we generated a lot of knowledge products around resource guides, how-tos, podcasts, webinars, and participated in a substantial research project looking at adaptive high-density grazing for brush management and control in savanna systems out at Sherburne National Wildlife Refuge. Phase 2 has further shifted towards trying to take this information out to landowners across the state. And phase 3, we hope to continue that work and kind of complete the last of our sort of research and demonstration that we're trying to do with landowners in hopes of being able to springboard into possibly an RCPP grant or another large funding source, probably federal source, looking for funds to take this to scale. And yeah, so the sort of frame that we were working around here for this particular sort of flavor or application of silvopasture is that the forest systems of Minnesota and really the eastern broadleaf forest have been going through a process of mesification for maybe 100 years or give or take, and what we see is a dramatic shift from sort of fire promoting forest communities that look oftentimes like oak or pine systems with a much more open grown canopy and an herbaceous understory, the kinds of trees that let a lot of light in and have the fuels, the sort of fuel leaf litter traits that favor and promote fire. So sort of a fire promoting and fire dependent ecosystem moving towards a more shade tolerant, fire suppressing, think maple, that sort of like change in system, and like all kinds of changes to soil nutrient dynamics and fire dynamics that come with that. And what we see, is that this has really led, here's an example of sort of that process, a snapshot in time of sort of that process, this classic open grown, structural oak tree in the center of the frame with a lot of young maple coming up underneath. And so kind of this transition from a fire dependent ecosystem to a fire suppressing ecosystem, or plant community at least. And this site has plenty of buckthorn elsewhere. Buckthorn will be kind of the focus of this presentation here, though we're really talking about sort of the process of mesification writ large. Yeah, and so, instead of maple, this is what I see across, hundreds of thousands of acres. I'm sure we've all seen this at this point, as you can see from the map there on the bottom, that the prevalence and spread, the distribution of common buckthorn across Minnesota is substantial. And this map even, I think, might be 5 to 7 years old. I couldn't find a date on it. That was from a U of M website. But so this is sort of the problem that we see, and we see this on a lot of private lands, a lot of Minnesota forest acres, and a lot of the oak woodland, oak savanna acreage in Minnesota that still remains, where at least that tree component is still there, is privately owned. And we felt like we really needed an approach to buckthorn management on private lands. And silvopasture offered one avenue of engaging private landowners towards a different system. And again, just looking back towards the history of the eastern broadleaf forest, that really much of the eastern broadleaf forest was this oak or pine or oak mixed with pine open grown ecosystem with a high diversity of herbaceous plants in the understory, some shrubs here and there, but mostly, far fewer species of trees and more of these oaks and pines with a lower stocking density, and letting lots, a fair sort of a high range, really probably 30 to 80% of full sunlight conditions into the forest floor. Contributing to the production of this herbaceous understory, and that this ecosystem is largely absent from the eastern broadleaf forest today. That's undergone hundreds of years of change and shift towards something completely different, and that we felt that this model, this historical, sort of model or a presence of this type of ecosystem was maybe something that we would like to see back in Minnesota's landscape, and that private landowners might be interested in this type of forest system. And how were these systems, created and maintained? It was created and maintained by fire, human mediated fire, by indigenous peoples primarily, some lightning, of course, as well, depending on various ecosystems. But really a lot of North America and a lot of the eastern half of the eastern broadleaf forest was managed by indigenous fire and other indigenous land management practices that really created and maintained these highly diverse and functional ecosystems. And that, even here in Minnesota, like we can see that, from this map, those red areas in particular, that this one assessment from looking, sort of inferring the relationship of fire to the fire-bearing trees in Minnesota, that we can see that there was a lot of prevalence of fire, fairly frequent fire here in Minnesota prior to, settlement by European farmers and the development of cities and everything else over the last 150 years or so. And this is, so here's sort of just a snapshot example of what these systems would have looked like. Again, like fairly tall in some cases, stands of pine on the upper slide there, the upper photo, kind of a southern pine savanna system, probably from, the likes of Georgia and Florida and those areas. And then elsewhere, like an example, I think that's from Missouri in the southern photo there of a oak woodland. I would call it a woodland. It's not quite a savanna. It's not, it's probably 30% or so of light conditions, but again, an herbaceous understory. And I just want to highlight that, like, in addition to the fire and the loss of so many, this whole suite of herbivores that made use and lived in these landscapes and contributed to the maintenance, along with fire as the primary disturbance sort of forces on the landscape. We also have seen a generally wetter climate. We've had multiple rounds of high grade logging. Again, the loss of those herbivores, the loss of passenger pigeons, also, like, they were a massive disturbance, force in the landscape that contributed to gaps in the canopy, that sort of thing. And the loss of the American chestnut. There's some suggestion that the chestnut wasn't maybe as prevalent as some sort of histories that I've heard, but the chestnut leaf is I think the most flammable leaf. So even just the loss of the chestnut contributed to a loss in flammability of the leaf litter. Also, an increase in atmospheric nitrogen deposition rates have occurred due to our fossil fuel combustion, and the Haber-Bosch process for generating fertilizers for agriculture has led to a doubling in nitrogen deposition rates from the atmosphere. Most terrestrial plant ecosystems are limited by nitrogen, so any increase in nitrogen, however small, can lead to dramatic shifts in sort of the adaptability or shifts in the plant communities that exist there, as well as the CO2 enrichment in the atmosphere. The increase in CO2 also affects the relative adaptation of different plants to those elevated levels, and generally favoring C3 over C4 plants. There's some suggestion that these things contribute to the shrubification of forest systems and grasslands. And so I just wanted to highlight there's a lot of aspects of global change contributing to this change in forest systems, in addition to the loss of fire and grazing. And what we see is that these systems create the conditions in which invasive plants like buckthorn can come in and dominate. We see oak dieback and disease proliferation, increased nitrogen mineralization rates in the soils, concerns around erosion. Think about southeastern Minnesota, where we have very little grass and fine roots holding the soil in place from heavy rain events, or around rivers and wetlands throughout the state where buckthorn may be dominating. A chance or a likelihood of an increased of ladder fuels that can contribute to catastrophic fire, thinking of northern Minnesota and some of the fires we've seen there in the last several years, not just a buckthorn issue, but just a general like overstocking and disease issue. And all of this has just resulted in the loss of, some of the most critical habitat and biodiversity, habitat throughout the eastern broadleaf forest, and a cratering of biodiversity. Think of the insect and bird sort of, the losses of those populations that we're seeing in dramatic numbers. And I just wonder, like, how much of that biodiversity crisis is related to the mesification of our forest systems. If we brought back herbaceous grasses and forbs underneath oak and pine systems, those are habitats that birds and insects can make incredible use of and be much stronger in their populations. So we would, for these and many other reasons, we would like to see this back in Minnesota. And silvopasture steps in because silvopasture and oak savannas kind of are a natural complement to each other. They can kind of look the same. That in silvopasture is the intentional integration of trees, forage, and livestock into one intensively managed ag production system. But it looks like generally relatively sparsely spaced, or lower density tree component with an herbaceous understory and livestock utilizing that site. And you can do that both ways. You can plant trees, such as the upper right here, where you can plant various usually timber, but you can do that. A lot of people are doing this with fruit trees and things now too, but timber is the classic sort of modern conventional version of this. And then the lower left is to work with an existing forest system, generally having to thin the canopy. Again here, thinning the canopy. So this is some of our work. This site's out by Barrett with one of our consultants at SFA. This site was absolutely, it's 40 acres or more, just dominated with buckthorn, 15-foot tall. This landowner spent years with just chainsaw and goats, just cutting buckthorn. and has ended up with kind of a different understory than we'd like in this at this moment, with a lot of other weeds. But so we're working through as a community, the sort of details around this restoration process to get back to a more desirable herbaceous and forb understory. And yeah, this is what some people are using goats, others are just using, the mechanical treatment, machinery, hand cutting, herbicide, whatever approach you want to controlling the buckthorn. We're exploring and trying to get people the best information that they need, and just share amongst our community of practitioners, and bringing in researchers and professional restorationists to just help advance that like state of art and state of knowledge for the community. But really, buckthorn control or removal is really like the first step towards restoration in our mind. That simply going out and cutting buckthorn in a system is not adequately restoring the site towards a functional dynamic, resilient system, and that we're likely going to have to come back 5 to 10 years later and treat that buckthorn again. It's an unsustainable model in our mind for private landowners, to approach the control of buckthorn. Again, just the upper left is out in Barrett. The lower left there is in Spicer. I think this is a nearly 100-acre buckthorn treatment. Again, an oak overstory. Probably a little bit too much on the density side with the oaks that are there. We could do some thinning there as well, but that landowner has put in an incredible amount of time controlling buckthorn with machinery and hand cutting, and they now have goats. And in this photo, we're seeding grasses and forbs on top. The upper right, we're talking about our seed mix and our approach to this site, and what the landowner's goals are, and sort of the work that would come in the future. The bottom right, we're talking about buckthorn, or not buckthorn, we're talking about biochar a little bit. Biochar is a pretty interesting hot topic out there right now. Great River Greening has some mobile kilns available. Check out Great River Greening's website for more information on biochar. I'm not going to go into it too much here, but we're interested in trying to reduce the carbon emissions related to the buckthorn control and the thinning activities, versus just open pile burning or chipping. So I'll leave that for those who are interested to check out on their own. But this is an example. This is somewhat of an example towards of a system moving in the direction we want. This is my home farm, one of the just like a couple acres of an area that I've been slowly working with thinning and control, cutting buckthorn, and then we've seeded these native ryegrasses. Seem to be working pretty well for us in these semi-shaded conditions. There's quite a bit of shade here in that lower right photo, maybe 30%, 40% of open sun conditions, and we're still getting these grasses established and really thick, productive. You look in the upper right-hand photo there, like there's a lot of competition there for buckthorn seedlings. We've got fuel there for potentially bringing in fire, which is one of our core interest areas for this next project, or the next phase of the project. And I'm using cattle to graze through this once or twice a year on rotation, usually in an area for one day at a time, and then they move on, oftentimes resting the site for over a year. But my cattle love it. I save it for high heat periods of the summer when they otherwise would just be miserable out in open sun conditions. When it's 100+ heat index, that we come in here and it's like moving into the air conditioning, and they stay happy and grazing and comfortable all day long. So the animal comfort side of this and the improved daily gains for those hot periods are really useful for a grazing operation. But this is the crux of our argument, and I think that the path that we're on is a sense that in order to tackle buckthorn and the many other challenges we face with our forest ecosystems and many other ecosystems in Minnesota, that we need a whole of community effort, and that this notion that forest ecosystems of North America are better understood as an ecocultural expression of long-term engagement with the landscape is exactly where we are coming from, and that we need to get people back out on the land, and we want to get the farmers and ranchers and the bird enthusiasts and the environmental restoration folks and the hunters and the fishermen, get them back together out on the land, engaging with fire and getting back engaged with the maintenance and management of these landscapes. And that this work, I think, is a springboard into that approach, that just having federal or state farm programs or DNR programs for brush control is not the same as restoration. And I think that to truly restore these places, we have to like cultivate a community of stewardship that is committed to a place over a long period of time. And that I think that if we do that, we might be able to solve many other problems sort of plaguing our country these days. And it's been a really enjoyable experience for me to do agroforestry because it brings a lot of these people together who otherwise don't really rub shoulders. Resources to get involved. We've got an upcoming field day on April 5th down in Le Sueur. We're going to be showcasing just sort of a small silvopasture by subtraction implementation site, demo site. We've also got another one. We've got another one on June 26th at Sherburne, looking at some of the research that's been going on out there, doing some field demo with goats on buckthorn and other brush. Hazelnut is quite a problem out at Sherburne National Wildlife Refuge, and some discussion around the economics of silvopasture and this work. And we'll also have another one late summer. You can find this by joining. You can stay in touch and find information about this by joining the Silvopasture Learning Network on Facebook. And all of this, you can find all these resource guides and podcasts and webinars and everything that I mentioned is over at the SFA website. And also quite a bit is over at the U of M's website there, silvopasture.umn.edu/learn. All of that should be in that document that's been shared in the chat or Q&A for resources for folks to take a look at. And I'll just wrap it up here. Sort of like in the last few weeks, there's been a lot of work around standing up prescribed burn associations in Minnesota. There are at least 3, I think actually possibly 5 at this point, sort of regional chapters throughout the state, including central Minnesota, east central, and at least 2 or 3 in southeastern Minnesota. And I think that we're going to end up with a statewide nonprofit Minnesota Prescribed Burn Association soon. And we're hoping to use those PBAs as a chance to springboard into this sort of larger stewardship of Minnesota resources as a communal effort. I'll stop there.
Tyler and Caleb, excellent presentation. Love it. We've got some questions online, and you want to continue holding your presentation there, Tyler, that's fine in case you have to go back. But the question here is, are chemicals like fertilizer absorbed by woody plants? And either one of you can answer that. It might be coming from Caleb's slides on multiple uses of trees and then multiple benefits of trees. Obviously, phytoremediation might be a topic in there too.
So there's some nutrient uptake from woody perennials. What exactly and how much nutrient uptake is still a question that's out there. Recently, the Savannah Institute has hired a cropping system scientist to start addressing those gaps in our knowledge.
Another question, are any Christmas tree farms pushing the envelope with alley cropping? I'd be curious to what they're growing in between the tree rows.
I am not familiar with alley cropping Christmas tree farms. I've seen examples, not personally, but online, of Christmas tree silvopasture systems with sheep. I guess the sheep and the Christmas trees play nice together because I don't see fences on those either, but it certainly could work. I just haven't. Yeah, Caleb, are you familiar with anyone doing alley cropping Christmas trees?
With hay. So it's a pretty basic, rather than mowing it to keep the grass down, they're just baling that hay.
Okay, thank you. Another question, what is your approach concerning the introduction of hybrid species and their potential impacts to native species? I know we've talked about this with hybrid poplar years ago.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm guessing that's related to hazelnuts.
Right.
Case.
I would say so. I think most of the researchers are not going to have a problem with that, and it really seems to be that there isn't any problem with natives working with the hybrid hazelnuts. Question on, I'm sorry,
When
go
we've
ahead.
done genetic testing on hazelnuts in the wild at Savannah Institute, there's been some small part of those wild hazelnuts that have the hybrid hazelnut or the European hazelnut genetics in them. So they are out in the wild.
Very interesting. Another question, Tyler, on your citations, they would like to just like the citations of your paper, but I think I'll refer to them to contact you directly for those citations that you have in your presentation. Tyler,
Yeah,
uh,
that paper was just published, so I can share that
okay,
with anyone who reaches out. Yep.
yep, and Tyler's email is tyler.carlson@tnc.org. Let's see, another question. Carl asked about or has a a website for burn scars. Maybe I'll ask Lauren to put that into the Q&A as well. And also a biochar type of conference coming up. Another question, do you advocate cutting buckthorn to the ground or leaving waist-high stumps and stripping and the stripping of new branches? I've seen studies where this may be more effective in the long run.
I think whatever approach you want to take to killing buckthorn is good by me. Um, and yeah, so depending on your interest or ability to use herbicide, um, I think that, yeah, if I wasn't looking to um, graze or maybe bring fire into the site and I just wanted to kill the buckthorn, but I wasn't going to use chemical, I might look to that. Can't remember, there's a technical term, I think, that's been crafted for that, leaving it high and then just coming back and stripping the shoots off. And I think that works if you have plenty of labor and a smaller site. Yeah.
And if you have grazing animals, that might be a possibility to cut down the tree and then let it coppice
Yeah.
and have the livestock munch on it for a few years. Another question, in regards to property tax classification, converting ag cropland to an agroforestry system, does land remain ag or will be considered forestry?
No, I think it remains ag.
Okay.
Hmm.
And that, I wonder if that might depend on the county too. I'm not sure, but if counties are different on that. Okay, good. Thank you, Tyler. Let's see, who are the speakers helping with the fencing and tree planting workshop from FSA?
Um, well, that'll be myself and probably Brad Gordon and a couple of others from Great River Greening. And then I'm guessing Jonathan Kilpatrick from Sustainable Farming Association will be involved in that as well. We may be, yeah, um, we may be looking for some experts out there with various tree protection equipment. Like some of it is not just fencing, but tree protection and tree planting, like just sort of the state of the art and state of the best information that we can get around like planting different stock types of trees, bare root, potted, the site prep that goes into that, etc. There's a lot of information out there. Some of it's conflicting, and we just like to clear that up for landowners. Yeah.
Tyler, I think this question is for you. With missification, what's up with the nitrogen, question mark? More due to lack of fire?
Um, it's both a species, I think it's to some extent a species shift to kind of high litter producing trees that are producing litter that kind of rot quickly and result in a lot of nitrogen being mobilized through the soil that way, as well as, a loss of fire. Fire itself tends to sort of reduce nitrogen out of the system that way. So yeah, like that nitrogen component is shifting dramatically as you go down the process of mesification.
Tyler, you mentioned the buckthorn will return in 5 years or so, even with cutting it down and using a herbivore. What do you suggest?
Yeah, our approach is that the latest research suggests that the seed bank from buckthorn is viable for about 2 years. So we really want to get into that site right after cutting sort of the existing stand of buckthorn. We want to provide competition and disturbance that's going to come back and take care of those buckthorn seedlings. And buckthorn seedlings don't, if you get some grass established, like those seedlings really struggle. to compete with a dense, not exactly a sod, but a taller, established grass, and particularly grass component, but forbs too. So we can really slow down their growth rate, even reduce their survival just from competition. And then that forage and forb component allows us to bring in fire. It allows us to bring in mowing or grazing on top of just the competition that's being provided by that. And that's what we feel like is the best long range off ramp from just sort of this buckthorn killing treadmill that we otherwise are going to find ourselves on. And that just killing the buckthorn and even like spraying out the seedlings that come the next couple of years doesn't really shift the system towards a more stable alternate state with competition that is tougher for buckthorn to invade, because the buckthorn is going to continue to be brought in by birds from nearby infestations that haven't been treated. And so this is our approach, I think, for private lands that seems to fit best, and I think is probably the most economical long range. And it provides that forage base, provides an incentive for landowners to be able to use grazing if they're so inclined. And then occasionally fire can come through and probably take out those buckthorn seedlings that do get past the grazing, but that may not need to happen but once every 10 years. And fire is a fairly cheap, I mean, depending on whether if you're custom hiring it out, it's kind of expensive. But if we can get you linked up to a PBA and get you a good burn plan, then like implementing fire across acres is like a very cheap treatment tool. And the landscape is asking for it. It has historically been dependent on it, and it is begging for us to bring it back to the extent that we can.
Another
I
question.
would also add, as I approach these sites and I'm looking at any sort of manipulation of either the canopy or brush control in a mechanical or with livestock, the first thing that I'll recommend to a landowner is to address the seed trees underneath the canopy. Because if we can just go around with triclopyr and diesel and do some basal bark treatment of those seed trees, then we're reducing our future buckthorn populations.
Thank you both. What type of landowner do you see most interested in restoration other than farmers? Do hunters or hunting landowners see a value in it versus food plots?
Yeah, I would say that, well, I don't know about versus food plots. I think I don't know about that, but I think
Right.
I think that I think that whether hunters are aware of it or not, um they should be interested in this. That you know, I have heard from many hunters that like their favorite little hunting, spot up north or wherever they go, they drive up for deer hunting, two or, one weekend a year, and they're up there maybe once in the summer or twice before that, that they can't even get in the woods anymore, because the buckthorn is so thick. And so I do think that hunters um are a target demographic that we need to reach out to, especially absentee landowner, hunting parcels. And I don't have like stats on how many acres there are of like absentee hunting land, more or less, that's the primary use of it, but I think it's substantial.
Tyler, if I
I would
could add,
also say
okay, go ahead.
I would also say that non-operating landowners are an important demographic to reach out to as well. Just they own and control the land that we would like to see some change on, and an annual leasing system that gets harder and harder. So just doing some education around how these practices can fulfill the value sets that these non-operating landowners have is important.
Thank you both. And let's see, Tyler, can you stop sharing and I'll share my screen here? I've got a couple more questions. We're not going to get to all the questions, so I'd like you to actually, if you could email either Tyler or Caleb your questions. I just had one more question I wanted to review here. It was very positive. This is really exciting information that I will help distribute to my neighboring farmers through our local newspaper. Thank you all very much for these links and more details. So thank you again. We would like to thank Caleb and Tyler for today's presentation. There you see their emails addressed on it. And obviously, I think Lauren distributed the chat, their emails, and also the links. Thank you very much. All of our recordings of Fridays with a Forester will be at the Z-Link, z.umn.edu/Fridays. And we'll have the Acorns talk next week, nuts and seed collection, March 28th. That is access, collection, organization, and redistribution of nuts and seeds for next week's Fridays with a Forester. And when you leave today's Zoom presentation, you will be asked to fill out an evaluation. I'd like to have your inputs on today's talk, and then also any future webinars you'd like to hear from. Also, if you're not receiving our Minnesota Woods, My Minnesota Woods newsletter, a monthly newsletter, you can access that Z-Link there and enter your email address, and you can get the monthly newsletter from us, our forestry team and University of Minnesota Extension. Again, all of our recordings for Fridays with a Forester are recorded at our Z-Link, z.umn.edu/Fridays. We'd like to thank Anna and Lauren and our presenters, Caleb and Tyler, for today's presentation. And thank you for joining us today for Fridays with a Forester. And we'll see you next time.